Welcome to the Kaleidoscope of Possibilities, Alternative Perspectives on Mental Health. My name is Dr. Adriana Popescu. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and leader in the field of mental health, energy psychology, addiction, trauma, and empowerment. In this podcast, we will be exploring mental health from a variety of perspectives, from the spiritual to the shamanic and beyond. What if mental illness isn't everything we think it is? What if everything we see as a pathology is actually a possibility? What else is possible with mental health? Hi, everyone. Dr. Adriana Popescu here with you again with another episode of Kaleidoscope of Possibilities, Alternative Perspectives on Mental Health. And I'm really excited today to have with me as my guest, Dr. Terrie Hope. She is a psychologist like myself, who inspires and creates positive, lasting change for individuals and corporations by igniting their intuitive capacities. She is a scientist, a clinical researcher, and a published author and global pioneer in cognitive neuroscience and emotional transformation. She holds a PhD and doctorate of natural medicine with advanced studies on quantum medicine, energy transformation, and consciousness. Her current focus in research is revolutionizing and transforming stress in the workplace. Welcome, Terrie.
Hey, how are you?
Wonderful. So happy to have you here today. I've known you for quite some time from the work that we both have done with Access Consciousness, and I definitely want to talk about that and all the other really interesting things you've been up to. But first, like I always like to start with my guests, tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you come to do this work? Let us get to know you a bit.
Well, and thank you for that. I actually started working in the world of sort of exploration of alternative medicine and alternative forms of, we'll call it healing or whatever, really a long time ago, like as many as 35 years ago, and then became more focused and serious about it, I would say, in about 2008. So, and really started to look at how I came from the pharmaceutical industry. I used to work in cardiovascular medicine and anti-infectives, and it was challenging because I knew that there was something that was different and we weren't really addressing, to me, the root cause of what was going on. It was just strictly using what was available, nothing wrong with it, but what was available. And I was going like, what if there's more to it? So I started really diving more into complementary or alternative methods to do this. And then, and I've been doing research. I kind of jumped into research because I was like, oh my God, we need to support, or it would be great to support that area too, because a lot of people are looking for evidence, even though we don't need evidence. Lots of people we can measure the effects, just like you can measure effects of pharmaceutical products. We can measure the effects, but we can't measure the whatever, sometimes the in-between piece, because it's not measurable. So I've really been on a mission to do as much research as I can to support that aspect. So there is, for those curious minds that want to go, how, does it work? Right. That there is. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's the research has become so much more important now, because we as who are primary clinicians, like I can speak for myself. I know what works because I try it on my clients and I try it on myself and I see a result. But our system of care, especially here in the States, is such that, there needs to be documented proof that a technique or medicine or whatever it is works. And so you have to have everything now has to be evidence-based, right? Mm-hmm. That otherwise an insurance company or whoever isn't going to want to pay for it. Right. Mm-hmm. So that there's been a real emphasis in our, I think, field with psychology, and certainly with some of these alternative energy psychology methods, that there's a demand for more research.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that that's what led me to that, is to just show that there's something else available, not just speaking the words, or, people experience it and then, but having something that's evidentiary is certainly compounds the human experience.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about some of the research projects you've been involved with, and maybe some of the things you're working on now too.
Cool. Thank you. Well, let's see. I've done so many studies. I just was looking at this before we got on. I went, oh my gosh, I have like 5 pieces of research that I've done. And the one that has been the most profound was published, and I'm so grateful for that, because it's hard to get research published. You can have the most brilliant piece of research, and then it has to get published. So only like 5% of all research ever gets published. So you think about like all of, I know, right? All the people that are busy like doing this stuff and spending money to make it happen. So that piece of research was on anxiety and depression and using access bars, which is one of the things I really like to use with my clients as well as research, because singularly, I'm now pretty much the only scientist who has researched access bars on its own. I mean, I've seen some snippets of where it's been added to other modalities, we'll call it. And that piece of research, what was fascinating about it is that I measured people's brains and I used standardized psychometric testing, and the individuals in the study were given only one 90-minute access bar session. And it was interesting because I used so many methods of measurement. God only knows why I chose that, but I did. And all of the participants actually had trait anxiety. So you know what trait anxiety is, right? Like it's a lifelong way of living.
Right.
And all of the participants their anxiety changed as much as 86% in one session. So wow. Usually you get that when it's situational, you might expect more change than if it was trait wise. And so that was really exciting, because even people getting one snippet of there's something else on the, walking on eggshells, anticipation of anxiety every day, to having that, then it actually, to me, I look at it and go, it's like if they feel better, then they have some more hope that there's something else possible and available for them. And the same thing was seen with the people who were in that, and all people had anxiety and depression that were in the study. So interesting. Mm-hmm. And that decrease, I think, was around 82%. So 82% drop in the severity for both of those. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that was really, it was the first piece that I ever looked at when I was looking at some of the psychological disorders that are there. And I also did some brain mapping. So I measured their brains before and after to see if, was there any change that went on with their brain as well? And that really showed really significant change. And it was fascinating, because I showed the results to one of the profound, well-known people who's involved in the brain mapping world in North America. And he said to me, the changes were so profound that you would actually have to do neurofeedback for something like 80 sessions in order to get the same results that I got when I did one access bar session for 90 minutes. And it went from 3 standard deviations below the norm, which is is really significant, to normal. Yeah. And he said, no, it would take you 80 sessions of neurofeedback to do what this was. In fact, he was really surprised, because I went, how do you explain? Well, I wanted to know a lot of things because he's so involved in brain mapping. And how do you explain some of this, that some of the results I saw that were significant, that were across all people in a study, they all had this high place of at 21 hertz, and it was across all people, which is where people cross over to healing. So when you get that, and it was at the top of the head, that particular spot at the top of the head, all of them had that going on. Some of them before, and definitely all of them afterwards. I went, well, how would you explain that in your world? He had no explanation.
Wow. So, Terrie, does that mean that the brain waves changed? Like, we know about like beta and gamma and theta, and we know like theta is a very deep state of relaxation or hypnosis. Was it brain waves? Is it the way that the parts of the brain were working? What can you tell us a little bit more without getting too sciencey, maybe for the average
I think
audience
I
member?
can. Well, no, because it's how do you articulate it without showing it? But what I could say is this: is that when you have dysregulation, either too much activity, which you often see with anxiety, or decreased activity, which is what you see with depression, those things, they will show up as aberrations to what be different than normal. And so it's the changes in brainwave activity that shows up on this particular method of evaluation. And in this case, the people who had depression, they actually went from like off the charts, like reduced activity, to normal. And most of the changes were seen between theta and beta, low beta, up to 21 hertz. So somewhere between 6 hertz and 21 hertz is where the majority of change was seen. And what was interesting in that particular study as well is that all the participants had a change in their EEG coherence, which means the connectivity between brain regions was changed, which means that it's easier for them you get out of the wave of when you get a thing where there's, let's say lower brain activity, where it's decreased because someone's depressed, you're going to get it. So it's almost like a trough. It's going to repeat that same thing where it stays in that depressive way because it's used to connecting that way. But when you move it away from that, it doesn't do it anymore. So what we saw was that it went to normal. So the level of coherence in those brain wave and those patterns changed. And I also saw that in another study that I did where we looked at, I think there were 80 people in that population. They were average people. They didn't have anxiety and depression, and 67% of them had a change in brain coherence. So that just allows the brain to function better.
Yes. Wow. So I have so many questions. Well, one, before we get into what is access bars, because I think we should explain that. Now these results that you got, were they like right after the session, or did you look like as a follow-up, like after a period of time? Like, are these changes considered temporary changes, or can there be more permanent changes to the way the brain functions?
Well, in this case, the study where I did the brain mapping, there were limitations to being able to do follow-up with it because it was in another city, and there was only available equipment for a limited time frame, so I couldn't actually do the follow-up. And that's kind of standard sometimes, unless you're in a teaching hospital or something where they've put aside time and available equipment to be able to do it. So it's one of the things that lacks sometimes when you do research. So I didn't have a chance to do it clinically, to do it from a research perspective. But what I know is that clinically, and the clients that I have worked with and people that I've talked to over time, it seems that changes that they experience either in anxiety or depression or PTSD or pain, they seem permanent. They tend not to regress.
Which is really amazing. And I think that corroborates also with some of the other research that's now coming out, again, on brain waves. And now they can look at people's brains under the MRIs, which is really exciting. And I know there's been research, at least in the field of energy psychology, where they have shown these more permanent changes to the way the brain is working, because they'll stick people in that MRI, 6 months or a year later, in some of these like facilities where they can do that, and they see that meditation changes the way people's brains functions, and tapping, EFT, and even some of the breathing techniques. I mean, there's so many modalities now that are being studied this way. It's really exciting for those of us who are clinicians, you know?
Yeah, yeah. And I think, well, I think that the idea that it changes something that changes the brainwave patterns is, an evidence piece, and that people are looking for, but it doesn't mean that it's the only place that it changes.
Right.
Right? Because pain, like let's say you had pain, it doesn't mean that it necessarily changes in the brain. It might, the pain might have been in your spine or something, and then it dissipates. It may or may not show up in the brain, but the brain isn't really, changes in the brain is very compelling.
Yes, yes, yes. It's a start. We know that this kind of energy work, because there is no real separation, right? There's no real separation between mind, body, spirit, all
Mm,
of it is one. It's from a quantum physics level, right? Everything is
of
one and
course.
connected. And so I think that's the level on which we're working, but maybe science and research isn't quite there yet. I mean, there's some really interesting research, but I think in the application of clinical research on these kinds of techniques, I don't know that we're there yet to be able to even understand sort of the magic. What is the active ingredient here? Like, what is happening energetically that's creating these structural changes or functioning of brain or other body parts, right? It's that our system is still somewhat fragmented in how it sees things.
Yeah, because people think that if it's the brain, then that's the only thing that's changing, or that or if it's the brain that changed, then it means something. If the brain didn't change, it doesn't mean something, which isn't necessarily true, because sometimes people could evolve over time and then go, oh my gosh, I just realized I don't have this pain anymore 3 weeks later, but it didn't necessarily happen at the time. And you can measure differences in stress in the body, and the stress could leave the body and show up differently in the brain later. So it's really, I think that our methods of measurement are, as you mentioned, like far behind what it needs to be. But I think that the number of people who are choosing different modalities, energy medicine, energy psychology, alternative methods to address things, the wave is so big now that people don't really require the evidence. It's just, and it's great to have the evidence so you could have another way to discuss it, so that to me, it's like an introduction to another conversation, but not a necessity anymore. Because how many people, go for a massage and go, can you prove that massage works?
Right, right. Well, I will say for those of us, like for me in private practice, people come to me, and if they're open to trying different things, I can run their bars, I can do some of this energy work with them. But where I work at the drug and alcohol rehab, where there are third parties involved and state regulatory agencies and insurance companies and all these things, the gift of the research that you and others have done is that it does give us an evidence base to say, look, this stuff works. It's not just woo woo weird out there kind of stuff, which is kind of what the old paradigm was. And still, I think in some parts of the country might still be the case. I'm lucky to be in California where people are more open to woo woo. But there's still some level of disbelief. And when we have data, hard data, and pictures of brains and EEGs and things that say, look, something happened before the person did this tapping or did this access bar session, and something is different afterwards, it helps us to bring these methods to these facilities where clients who are severely abused and traumatized and have horrible anxiety, depression, PTSD, and all kinds of conditions, and they're struggling with addiction, for us to be able to do things like bars and tapping and all that, because I have some evidence to show when it's questioned, has been a huge gift, and honestly has led us to have greater outcomes. You had mentioned before, that some research is it's really hard when you're doing a program to distill what is it. Is it the therapy? Is it the medicine they took? Is it the group therapy? Is it 12-step? I was asked to write a research paper also on our work at the rehab, and we can't say what the active ingredient was, but I can say that our data for outcomes is way better than what the standard, and we're even getting an award actually at our rehab for getting better outcomes with our clients. So reduction in symptoms, in their mental health symptoms, reduction in their drug and alcohol cravings, and feeling better about themselves. And all of this work is part of it. So I'm grateful to people like you that do pave the way for us to have some data to show these folks that, hey, there's something to this. And you should allow us to do it with the clients who so desperately need it, because the standard paradigm, treatment model isn't super effective. The statistics are not good for addiction treatment. So
yeah, and that's fantastic that you have done that, and is being recognized as being greater than other outcomes, other in clinical practice for that kind of environment. I mean, that's fantastic. That in and of itself is bonus.
yes, really exciting
So
stuff.
great.
So, I know it is so exciting. So Terrie, tell us more about what is access bars, because people listening to this at this point are probably, their curiosity is whetted if they don't already know.
What is access bars? So access bars, I would call it an energy technique, and it's where the person, they can be sitting or lying down, and the practitioner touches certain points on the head. There's 32 points on the head, and what the practice does is it releases energy. How do I know it releases energy? I just know.
You can feel it in your fingers. I mean,
You
it
can
feels
see.
sometimes
Of
like
course you can feel it in your
feel
fingers.
these tingly spots on the head. They really are. And if you move your finger just like, a little bit over, it doesn't feel tingly in a different spot. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's true. And the release of the energy, what that does is anything that is not serving the person, any thought, feeling, emotion, anything at all that is really the person is willing to let go of, will release. So if they had trauma, and it just dissipates. It dissipates not only from the mind, but from the physical body too. And it's permanent.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely permanent.
That's what's really exciting. Yeah.
And people can have sessions that are as short as 20 minutes and have significant change. So it's not like it requires, so the research I did was 90 minutes because I chose 90 minutes and that was what I chose. But the new research that I'm working on now, there were sessions that were 30 minutes long, and the session length did not determine the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
So whether you had 30, 60, or 90 minutes as part of that other piece of research, the clinical outcomes in changes in anxiety, depression, and stress, there was no difference statistically in I think it's like 400 people.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So you can have a really short session and have something different occur.
Yeah. That's really cool, because I would have thought, a longer session would clear more stuff. I also would think, and I don't know if there's been any research on this, that multiple sessions, right? Because we don't necessarily we could just do access bars one time, but for those of us that are active practitioners, I know I get my bars run at least once a week, as much as possible. There seems to also be like a cumulative effect. Has there been any research on that?
No, I designed 2 studies that had 3-week follow-ups in them, and it's up for the person to be part of the follow-up, and it's voluntary. So if they don't choose to do the follow-up, it just doesn't get done. You can't force people to do research. It's one of the things. It's like they can or they can't. They can say start or stop anytime they want to. It's part of good research. But it's funny, I didn't manage to capture data as a follow-up in any of the research that I've done so far. And it could be just people were feeling good or, whatever, and just didn't get, we all have busy lives, right?
Sure.
Yeah, let me just do one more survey because I can. So yeah, no, I haven't managed to do that, but I do see that in my clinical practice, that the more people choose to do access bars, it appears that they have, well, absolutely less stress for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And
I see that.
anxiety.
Yeah, I see that too, and I certainly see that in my own life. And I think in general, if you're able, I mean, it's always a combination of things, right? I don't just do bars with people. I do also work with more traditional, let's look at your belief systems, right? The kind of the cognitive behavioral piece. Let's look at unresolved trauma and fear responses, the brain that gets hijacked by that fight, flight, freeze response. But I think that the access bars and some of the other body processes, which we can talk a little bit about, which is other kinds of energy work under the umbrella of access consciousness, I do see that people with trauma and that overactive nervous system, right, where they kind of get triggered to that fight, flight, freeze response in situations that are not life or death situations, I do see that calming after a while in clients who get repeated sessions of bars and body processes.
Yeah. And it's funny because you talk about tapping, and I did do some research where I did 35 people, and I did brain mapping before and after an EFT session. And they were people who had anxiety, and they noted that their anxiety decreased. And it also showed that there were changes in patterns in their brainwave for that. And that was after, I think, if I recall correctly, because I did that research in like 2016, the tapping session was 20 minutes with a practitioner. So that was really, so, just another place of where other kinds of techniques can show up and make changes, right?
And rapid changes, like what I've seen especially with like the really growing body of research. I think at this point there's over 250 published research studies on sort of the energy medicine, energy psychology techniques. And what they're finding is that when they compare something like EFT tapping, let's say, to a gold standard cognitive behavioral therapy in treating PTSD or phobias or things like that, they may find that both techniques get similar results, but the tapping or the energy-based ones are like in half the time, right? Instead of 12 sessions, they get the same result in 6 sessions. And I think that is really what's so fascinating, because, people will do traditional talk therapy for years on end and feel like they're not necessarily getting anywhere. But when I work with folks with these other methods, they see results really quickly. Sometimes like right at the end of the session, they walk out feeling way better than when they came in. That to me is really the exciting part of this work. Can you tell us about, what you found in your clinical work working with these tools?
Yeah. And, and it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I did a study on PTSD, anxiety, depression, and PTSD. And you're mentioning like how it's different and how it happens faster. And it was funny. I did research on these police officers in the UK. And the ones that were introduced into the study came from the Police Federation, from the psychologist, and they were at the end of there was nothing more they can do. They had done EMDR, they had done talk therapy, they had do all the standard kinds of things that they would use, including pharmacology. And they had not really had any breakthroughs in changing the person's anxiety, depression, or PTSD. And that particular study, I did 7 sessions of access bars. And then I did pre and post, recorded the results. And what was amazing, so you have to think, these people, they're about to retire, even though they're young people, because they have not been able to get out of the trauma that they had were experiencing. And the one that, and it was like not a ton of cases, because then we were interrupted by COVID. We were just interrupted by COVID. But the one that was really interesting is the one who was really severe. He had done everything. He had PTSD, and the results was a 51% drop in PTSD symptoms, which is considered clinically significant by that particular methodology. And that was 7 sessions. And that was at the end, like everything I've been trying and going, is so fantastic to me that there's these other things that are available, and they don't have to be the last resort, but they, you know, they could be a first resort, but there's some other things that are available even no matter what, and they happen quickly. Because 7 sessions for someone who's had PTSD for a long time is not very much.
Well, I think it was a huge coup for the Energy Psychology Association when they were able to get the VA, the Veterans Administration, which is a notoriously difficult bureaucracy to navigate, to actually approve EFT tapping for their veterans with PTSD. And I think that's amazing when you get like a big organization like that approves and calls this method safe, and that it's okay to use with those veterans who, have experienced horrific things and for whom the traditional methods haven't been super helpful. Like I gotta say, as a clinician, exposure therapy to me, like having the person tell their story or keep thinking about the same traumatic thing over and over and over again, just re-traumatizes them, makes them want to go out and drink and use drugs. It doesn't seem, I don't find it to be particularly helpful. But if I had tapping, if we had access bars, we have these, these other methods, even meditation and, specific breathing techniques, all those things do seem to calm the amygdala, do seem to get the person out of that fight, flight, freeze response, which pharmacology and other things haven't been able to do. I have a friend who's a psychiatrist. She's like, we don't have good meds for PTSD. They don't do a whole lot.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's kind of interesting because I'm thinking about it sort of interrupts these types of modalities, if you want to call it modality, seem to interrupt the pattern of how things are. So if the energy is there and now it's not there, or the person experiences something that's entirely different in a very short period of time, it probably signals something in the brain or their sense of being that there's something else there. And I think that the brain response always goes to better, but I could be.
I don't think you're incorrect. I mean, look, 5,000 years of traditional Chinese medicine says if you actually were to restore balance to the flow of energy or qi in the body has the capacity to heal itself.
That's true.
Right.
That's definitely true.
And if there's no real separation between, the body, the mind, and all of that, then I think it would stand to reason that if we can restore balance to what is energetically not in balance with these different methods, then we all have the capacity for innate wellness and health and well-being, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, right, across all of it. So
yeah, but I was thinking that it defaults to the positive, like the body and the brain default to healing. It doesn't default to the other way around, to degradation.
No, and I think that's what the traditional paradigm has overlooked, right? In their focus on where you started the conversation with symptomology, right? Let's medicate and quell these symptoms rather than getting at the root cause of what's causing a dysfunction, letting the body, and the being restore toward wellness, default back toward that state of wellness that we were born into this world with, right?
I know, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
So tell us about some of the newer stuff you're working on. You're really now wanting to work with bringing bars into corporate environments, workplaces. Tell us more about that.
Well, one of the things that I've been aware of, I stopped doing research. I had a bunch of research projects going just before COVID closed down things. And so I put everything on pause. And then more recently, I've been looking at the aftermath and how many things are like seemingly upside down. And one of the things that seems to be prevailing is incredible internal stress for people and how they bring it into the workplace. And they're fighting for this sort of what they say is work-life balance, which means like, if you're working, you're not living. I go, that's a very interesting point of view, but and then escape to go home, which there's all of this other stress that they try to manage. And it's kind of, I'm not sure that how we've designed living currently on the planet, with all of the things that are going on and all the things that have gone on with COVID, to manage, we're not given the tools to manage it.
Right.
We're not even given the tools to manage this much change as it has changed, people's perceptions of living. And I looked at it and I went, wow, if we could create an environment within corporations where the corporations themselves support whole wellness, not just here's your money to go to the gym, but it became culturally balanced, if you will, and that people could live from a sort of a balanced way where there was no separation between work and life or work and living, then what would that create, not only for the people who are in the corporations, but also for the corporations, because the corporations in and of themselves would actually energetically become greater, because the people would be feeling better. And if they're feeling better, they are more focused and more present in their work. And some of the research that was done by Harvard years ago was that one of the big cost factors to corporations is lack of presenteeism and absenteeism. So presenteeism is like you show up for work, but you're just showing up for work. And then, absenteeism is just what it is. It's like you don't show up. But the idea of presenteeism not being available, and like, how do you do that? So if you can recapture people who are just showing up for work and have them be more engaged, you actually create a different environment, not only for the people, but the corporation. And I think what's ultimately, we have to look after people. Not that the corporation making more money is like an important thing, but it's like, how do you get it so that everybody, you create an environment that is optimal for everybody?
Yes. Well, it's the principle that we talk about in access consciousness, when we talk about some of the verbal concepts and verbal facilitation, what I would refer to as the kingdom of we, right? Which is where it's the greatest benefit for all parties, not just beneficial for, let's say, the people at the top making the most salary or the shareholders or whoever, right? There's been an emphasis, I would say, in our corporate culture where that has been the case. And I think what we're seeing since one of the, byproducts of the pandemic is the great resignation, and people saying, no, you can't continue to, treat us this way or exploit us, or, not allow us to have like work-life balance or whatever it is. I think there's a real demand from the workforce to have a different kind of structure. So I think you're really on the cutting edge here with enhanced wellness and work-life living balance,
and how to look at it from that point of view, is like to recognize that for the corporations to get the value that people bring to their corporation is really valuable.
Yes.
Really valuable. And I think it's kind of, everyone is so looking at how technology is going to save the day, and I go, not really. You still need the human thing even more so now than ever.
Yes, and we need to invest in our workers and into helping them function and feel good and be at their best, so they can contribute more to whatever it is they're doing. I mean, that's just for our humanity as a whole, like,
I know, right?
Super required right now. Yeah. So,
totally.
So how can, if people want to find out more about this or about your private practice work, or like, how can they get a hold of you? Where can they go?
The best way to reach me is on my website, which is drterriehope.com. So DRTERRIEHOPE.com.
Yeah. And I love your last name, offering us hope. hope for a greater future for all of us. And I think that these tools and the research that you're doing, and just all that's getting created right now in this area, in this field, is just so wonderfully exciting. So many people are benefiting from these methods, and
I know.
just tremendous and miracles. There have been miracles, many. I'm sure you've seen in your practice. I certainly have.
Oh,
I've
for sure.
experienced it myself. I should be dead by now from a supposedly incurable disease. That energy medicine and these approaches, guess what? I'm still here. So
That's
we
so
know this
great.
stuff works, and I'm really grateful to people like you who are giving us some evidence to show that it works, so that we can get these tools out there to more people in the world. So I'm really grateful for your contribution to that, and for being here with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And really thank you for your time. I really, it's been fun.
Thanks everyone also for tuning in. If you like this episode, please click like, share it, comment on it, rate it on Apple, whatever it is, so that we can get the algorithms to show this material to more people, so others can find out that there are many other healing modalities out there. If you or someone you love is suffering with depression, anxiety, or any other kind of mental health condition, that there is hope for you to heal. So thanks so much, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of Kaleidoscope of Possibilities, Alternative Perspectives on Mental Health. This has been Dr. Adriana Popescu. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe and share with others. To find out more about me, my guests, and more, please visit my website at adrianapopescu.org. See you next time.